So there were also a number of sociodemographic issues that came out. One of them is college-going intensity. Not college-going rate, not what percentage of the people who live in your state go to college, but how many college students are there in your state as a percentage of population. College-going intensity. Arizona, right? Arizona, what, 5.5 million, roughly? 5.1 million, something like that. They opened the fall semester, if I remember correctly, with 1.1 to 1.4 million college students. So, I mean, it's some unbelievable number of people, like 1 in every 10 people in Arizona are college students. So, I think the other are retired, so it's kind of an interesting teasing about that. Anyway, then secondly is traditional college enrollment. How many full-time white males are paying their own way do you have, particularly? Third is Hispanic diversity. Fourth is traditional diversity, percent women, percent African American, and percent of students on federal financial aid. 70% of federal financial aid is need-based. The next one is interesting. It is state and local aid as a separate dimension. State and local aid, over 70, or almost 70% of it, is not need-based across the United States. It's athletic scholarships, Hope grants, left-handed blue-eyed women from Jackson County who want to be nurses. It's all kinds of people and all kinds of grants. But 70% of state and local grants and aid are not need-based across the country, and that's from the U.S. Department of Education. I call that financially cost discounting. You're simply discounting cost of going to college. It is not about need. And then the final one is education loans, which really is financial aid for middle income people. If you qualify for a loan, your family probably has a bit larger income than those people who are on other forms of federal aid. So let's look at the percentage of people requiring degrees by state. I also love regression. That's one of those things that was beaten into me when I was 20 and never lost it. If you look, traditional diversity and cost discounting lower for a state the expectation of the number of jobs that will require college degrees. So the more you have to discount to get kids to go to college, and the greater traditional diversity you have, the less likely you are to need more people. Now, what does that tell us? More educated people. It doesn't tell us that they're not able. Let's not go there. What it tells us fundamentally is we still haven't figured out how to get them into the workforce in a reasonable way, and how to get them through the educational system in a reasonable way. Education-linked innovation has a positive impact. The more graduate students you have, the more funded R&D you have, positive. And then business innovation is also positive. It explains about 56% of the variation across all 50 states. When you add in, when you look at median household income by state, again, I can explain about 75% of the differences among the states. And we see traditional diversity in education loans, where traditional diversity lowers the median household income. Financial aid cost discounting is associated with it. But again, we see business innovation and traditional college enrollment being very positive. And here I'm going to explain about 3/4 of the variance among the states. As a sociologist, I've never explained 3/4 variance in anything. My dissertation, I explained about 16%. I only had a beer. Okay. Now, when we add to that the percent of students with a college degree, and we force that to come in after the other variables that we know about your sociodemographics, we know about the structure of your economy, we still have on median household income, the percentage of people with a college degree is still very important in predicting median income. So for all the purposes out there, political purposes, that's still a big deal. If you're trying to improve median household income, which if I were a politician would be willing to do. Now, per capita GDP by state, I've had to leave. I don't understand Delaware well enough yet. I do understand Arizona a little better. They were major league outliers, and so I had to leave them out. So this is about 48 states, not 50. But here, Hispanic diversity. So many Hispanics are migrants that they tended to migrate to where the jobs are and where the activity is. And so the more diversity you have, the more Hispanic diversity you have, the higher your state GDP. The more middle class people you have, those people qualifying for loans, the higher your state GDP. And then financial aid, the more you have to cost discount, the less your productivity. Again, here, I'm explaining over half of the differences in per capita GDP, and I don't know anything about your economy. All I know is who your people are and what the conditions are to which they're going to college. Don't know anything about your economy at all. Okay. Now, when we add in the percentage of people with college degrees, it is still important, but not as important as the literature will tell you. And again, we're now up to 58% of the variance, almost 60% of the variance. So almost 60% of the differences in per capita GDP. When we look at unemployment, our predictions aren't as good, and that's partly because the big states have just gotten so hit. But what you see here is the size of the new economy matters, but also traditional diversity. Unemployment tends to be higher, and where you have where you have education-linked innovation, the unemployment rate tends to be lower. What's interesting is in this case, for unemployment, the percentage is also with college degrees. People are going to where the jobs are, which is why their unemployment rate is lower, much more than simply if you produce more, it will lower your unemployment rate. That's one of the really interesting pieces of this, and in fact, and that's statistically insignificant, but it actually is a slightly negative trend. So, what about education-linked innovation? Education-linked innovation happens most where you have traditional college enrollment, meaning white students going full-time without a lot of financial aid, where it gets less where you have traditional diversity, women, African Americans, and low income. It gets higher where you have greater numbers of people enrolled, and it goes down the more Hispanics are part of that group. So, what does all this tell us? What does all this mean? One is that the completion agenda, yeah, it's useful. It's useful. But the completion agenda isn't by any means the entire answer. And what's worrying the heck out of me is when I hear legislators and Congress people talking about the completion agenda, they're absolutely ignoring the importance of R&D, and they're ignoring the importance of graduate education. And they've got a real possibility here if they define the completion agenda in terms of increasing undergraduate teaching loads of faculty members. They have a real possibility here of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And that's something that we really need to help them understand. Now, we as universities have a responsibility to find new ways of teaching that produce better outcomes at less cost. Otherwise, we are going to have this pressure on us. But we have to do a better job. And I mean, a lot of us like the 19th century a lot, but we've got to find new ways of teaching that aren't really from the 19th century. And there are some interesting experiments going on. Carnegie Mellon's doing some really interesting things, and some others out there. Third is that NGA has known this for a long time, National Government Association, known this for a long time. If you all are in the public sector, look at their best practices papers. There really are some of the best statements out there on what seems to work in terms of education-related development. And then finally, the issue of inclusion. Right now, it's not very popular to talk about, but we have to start thinking about it for real. Women now represent the vast majority, not vast majority, significant majority of undergraduate students in the United States, running on 55%. If you then take males on need-based financial aid, you have another pretty good whack of people. If you take African American then, you have another pretty good whack of people. And then if you start trying to figure out how to include Hispanics in that, you've got the majority of the potential workforce in the future that you're dealing with. And our policies really aren't oriented toward dealing with those folks and their needs. There's a really good article in the American Sociological Review in the last couple of months that looks at why women don't become engineers. And a lot of it has to do not with their life desires in terms of, I don't want to become an engineer because I'm going to have a family, but it has to do with the subtle messaging throughout their education that tells them they shouldn't do it. Our son, for various reasons, chose to go back to school at 30 and chose to go to an HBU, and he's now leading a study group of about 15 women, all African Americans, all of whom are perfectly competent to be chemists or biologists, all of whom are really scared because they don't think they know anything. And yet they're very, he comes home and I says, they know how to do this. They just can't get over being frightened. That's what the literature says, and that's what his experience is right now. We have to start training teachers on how to deal with these issues early, and quite honestly, we have to start testing science in elementary school. Right now, the national tests are around math and language. They are not on science. And talking to teachers, if they aren't going to be evaluated on it, they're not going to spend the time on it, because they're only going to be evaluated on whether their kids make those two standards. So we really do need to add that. And looking at mentoring programs, et cetera, I will stop there. But I found it fascinating. Not exactly what I expected when I started, but that really, if I know the structure of your student body, I have a pretty good idea what your GDP is, without even having to know anything about your time. Thank you all very much.